Death is something that we all have to deal with in life. It is never less than a harrowing experience for those close to the deceased, and there are so many ways that it can happen. There is simply no escaping the cold, hard grasp of the Reaper, but it is also weirdly, morbidly fascinating sometimes, especially when there is something a little odd about how some of life's finales can occur. We see it in many aspects of life. Some label such events as merely coincidence, whereas others may see them as evidence of the existence of a deity or the affirmation of the concept of karma. Now, where things really tend to get engaging is with the famous. Every death is tragic, but famous people reach so many lives that their losses tend to be felt across the globe by millions of people, and the media deifies celebrities so much they sometimes don't even feel like real people, which makes their deaths even more starkly unreal, especially when it comes in a very weird way. Every single person on this list met their end in a manner that was as oddly ironic as it was tragic, showing that even the Grim Reaper themselves has a morbidly twisted sense of humour. I'm Will for What Culture, and here are 10 famous people who suffered death by irony. 10. Sam Kinison jokes about drink driving and is then killed by a drunk driver. The son of a preacher, Sam Kinison took the fire and brimstone approach to Christianity and brought it to his stand-up routine, rising to fame in the mid-80s on the back of fiercely aggressive and often hilarious insights about life. To say he was a troublemaker would be putting it lightly, and his sets were constantly scrutinized for their occasional misogyny or homophobia, something that Kinison occasionally claimed were simply parts of the act and didn't reflect his real-life feelings. One of his most famous bits came during his first HBO special in 1985, where he spoke about drink driving. Quote, "We don't want to drink and drive, but there's no other way to get the effing car back to the house. How are we supposed to get home?" By the time 1992 rolled around, Kinison was an established name and had just married his third wife. Unfortunately, his story had a tragic end. In April of that year, Kinison was involved in a car accident that claimed his life. While Kinison was sober at the time, the driver of the other vehicle, 17-year-old Troy Pearson, was under the influence of alcohol. 9. RENé GOSCINNY suffers a heart attack during a cardiac stress test. RENé GOSCINNY is a name that is perhaps not known to many. It certainly isn't as well known as the names of his most famous creations, Asterix and Obelix. The world's strongest Gauls weren't all that he was famous for though, and so GOSCINNY also worked on the iconic book character Lucky Luke during what was considered the golden age of the industry. While his death had nothing to do with the characters that he helped bring to life, it was no less interesting for its irony. He passed away in November 1977 during a routine cardiac stress test that was carried out in his doctor's office. The cause of death? Cardiac arrest. It appears that the routine test may have ended up putting a little too much stress on his heart, meaning that the thing that was meant to help him discover how healthy his heart was simply served to kill him instead. 8. Segway owner Jimmy HESELDEN dies in a Segway accident. When the Segway vehicle was first introduced in 2001, it was hailed as a revolution in transportation. While these lofty ambitions never came to pass, the one thing that was trumpeted from the rooftops was that the Segway was a safe vehicle. At one point, it even claimed that it was impossible to fall off while riding one, though hundreds of YouTube clips later, we can see that clearly isn't true. The company still had this reputation for safety when it was taken over by Jimmy HESELDEN in 2010. He appears to have taken to the technology immediately, and he owned a Segway himself that he used on a regular basis. Unfortunately, HESELDEN's faith in the Segway may have been unfounded. He became the most high-profile casualty of the vehicle when he plunged over a cliff and to his death while riding his Segway in Thorpe Arch in West Yorkshire. 7. Qin Shi Huang dies due to mercury poisoning. The man who conquered all of the warring states of China and united them under a single banner was also obsessed with alchemy. In particular, he spent much of his life searching for the ever-elusive elixir of life, in the hopes that he would be able to gain immortality and presumably continue his rule for centuries. Of course, the field of alchemy, at least in terms of creating an immortality potion, has long since been discredited, but at the time a lot of ingredients were tried in an effort to concoct the legendary elixir. Qin Shi Huang's ingredient of choice that he thought would bring him the desired results was mercury. You can probably see where this one is going. Today we know just how lethal mercury is to humans when ingested, yet Chi ingested mercury pills on a daily basis in an effort to prolong his life. It was this that eventually killed him, with the result being civil unrest and competition for the United China, as he had failed to leave a will due to his belief in his pills. 6. Joseph Stalin dies because of the culture of fear he created. One of the most famous and feared leaders in all of history, Joseph Stalin created an enormous culture of terror and paranoia during his time in charge. Even those who were closest to him could never quite be sure that they remained on his good side, and there are many stories about people being gotten rid of if Stalin felt that they were a threat to his power. Stalin began to suffer from increasingly poor health following World War II, with the worst of it coming after a dinner in March of 1953. He retired to his room for the night, but failed to emerge the following morning. His guards had been given strict instructions not to bother him, so nobody would dare to enter his room for fear of suffering some sort of deadly reprisal. This meant that nobody was aware that Stalin's health had deteriorated and he was very close to dying. In the end, his doctors arrived on the scene, but it was too late. The culture of fear that Stalin worked so hard to foster ended up ensuring that no help would come when he needed it most. 5. Thales of Miletus dies of thirst. Thales of Miletus was a Greek mathematician and philosopher who espoused the belief that water was the originating principle of nature, essentially making it the most important substance in the world. The very basic idea of the theory is that water provides the nourishment for all living things, and that even things that are hot are created by water and have their states changed by it. Beyond that, he is often hailed as the first true Greek mathematician, and his work was commented on and often revered by such notable Greeks as Aristotle. It is believed that he laid down some of the basics of geometry that later mathematics is built upon. While there is much conjecture about the way he died, according to Diogenes, a biographer of Greek philosophers, he passed while watching a gymnastics contest. Diogenes states that the exhaustion caused by dehydration led to the man's death. As such, the philosopher who so strongly espoused water as the first principle died due to a lack of it. 4. Felix Powell kills himself. If you are old enough, you will certainly be familiar with the popular little ditty, "Pack up your troubles in your old kit bag and smile, smile, smile." It is a charming song and a little infectious, and carries a central message of always remaining happy no matter what life throws at you. It was written by brothers Felix and George Henry Powell in 1915, and quickly became a popular wartime song, even winning a competition that was looking for a morale-boosting tune that could help the boys in the trenches during their time of need. Simply put, it is one of the most optimistic songs ever written, and Felix Powell's tune ingrained itself into the minds of millions during the era. Unfortunately, his story was not a happy one. In 1942, having become apparently disillusioned with how he was unable to adapt his songwriting to a different generation, Powell tragically took his service-issue rifle and shot himself in the heart. 3. Frederick Treves suffers a ruptured appendix. Sir Frederick Treves can rather legitimately lay claim to being the single most famous surgeon of the Victorian era, simply for his association with Joseph Merrick, better known as the Elephant Man. However, before his interactions with the former sideshow attraction, Treves had already gained a reputation as a surgeon of the highest repute in an era where surgery usually required a hefty dose of ether and a few strong men to keep the patient in place. Most notably, he is recognized as being the very first surgeon in England to perform a successful appendectomy, which he performed in June of 1888, which almost directly led to his appointment to the position of Surgeon Extraordinary to Queen Victoria. Despite his specialism in regards to the appendix, he was unable to use his skills to prevent the death of his own daughter, who died of a perforated appendix in 1900. The incident would foreshadow his own fate. In 1923, having moved to Switzerland to live out the remainder of his years, Frederick also died of a ruptured appendix. 2. Timothy Treadwell gets eaten by a bear. Anyone who has seen The Grizzly Man will already be well aware of the fate of Timothy Treadwell. Throughout his life, Treadwell had a love affair with bears, which began with a general fondness for all animals when he was just a child. Following a heroin overdose, Treadwell made the decision to dedicate his life to the protection and continued research of the creatures after a trip to Alaska resulted in him seeing his very first bear in the wild. This eventually led to him spending an astonishing 13 summers with the grizzly bears at the Katmai National Park in Alaska, apparently demonstrating that he had managed to form some sort of kinship with the creatures that would surely have attacked any other such intruders. Unfortunately for Treadwell, bears are still wild animals at heart, and even he was unable to prevent his eventual fate. During his 13th summer at the park, he and his girlfriend were attacked and killed by a 28-year-old brown bear. Nobody knows quite what prompted the attack, especially given the previous success Treadwell had, but it was an ironic end for a man who had dedicated himself so completely to the animals. 1. Keith Moon overdoses while quitting alcohol. The legendary drummer for The Who was always well known for his destructive behaviour, and he practically wrote the book on rock and roll excess. Between his addiction to alcohol, his escapades in many a hotel room, and the occasional exploding toilet, he was the blueprint for generations of future stars. However, by the time 1978 rolled around, Moon was getting a little bit tired with the lifestyle. He was sick of his dependence on alcohol in particular, which led to the star taking steps in an effort to get clean. Not wanting to commit himself to rehab or any other institution, he instead began a prescribed course of a drug called heminevrin, which also happens to be highly addictive. The drug is used for cases of severe alcohol withdrawal, but it is recommended that it only be taken under strict supervision. Moon did not heed those recommendations. In an effort to escape the life of excess that he had become accustomed to, Moon instead developed an addiction to the drug, and that led to his death of an overdose on September 7th, 1978. After he ingested 32 tablets. The recommended daily dose was no more than 3. And there you have it, folks, 10 famous people who suffered death by irony. Feel free to drop this video a like if you enjoyed it, and drop me a follow on Twitter at YouSlyDowU. I'm Will for What Culture, thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you next time.